Okay, mic check. I think the mic's working. Hello, everybody. Last meeting. So, if you're here with me this morning, good morning. In chat, I see War Dog and Justin. So, good morning, and good morning if anyone else was able to make it. Or if you're watching the video later, morning, Justin. If you're watching the video later, thanks for sticking it out all the way to the end of the semester, and now we're just down to the final. So, we'll do a quick review, just remind you of what to expect on the final, and then I'll do a web server install. So if you are watching the video, shut down your virtual machine, because before we do the web server install, we're going to change the virtual machine settings. So I'll say this again when I get done with the review, but if you're with me right now or watching the video later, go ahead and shut down your virtual machine and just leave, I'll just show you, just leave VirtualBox running, but not the virtual machine itself, because we're going to go update the changes before we install the web server. Okay. So I'll walk through this week's module, but again, we're not doing any new content. We're just doing a review for the final exam. And then we've completed a good semester. At least I think you guys had a good semester, and hopefully I didn't get in your way too much for doing that. All right, so week 17. There's no discussion this week. There's no homework this week or lab. There's just the final exam. So, do I have my notes up where you can see them? Yeah, so on my notes, I'll just go through my notes. So what the final exam covers, well, actually you can see it if you click on it. So the exam covers weeks 10 through 16. So that's labs 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. What the final exam is set up to do is it will draw a selection randomly for you from the prior week's labs. So you've seen all the questions before. I may have fixed one mistake somewhere in there along the way. But they're the same questions, with I think one question I had a mistake in one of the answers, so I fixed that. Anyway, it's an open book exam, just like the first exam, so have whatever in front of you you need to do well on it. It's got 50 questions, they're 5 points apiece, so it's longer than a normal week's lab. And then just like the midterm, there's no timer, meaning once you start, you can just keep the exam open, but once you've clicked submit, then you only get one chance at a submission. So unlike a week's regular lab, you only get one submission. And then they're due by Sunday at midnight, and that sort of closes out the semester. So that's the big activity, and then the reminders, only the final exam this week, and then you're done. And most of you are in, I think almost all of you, or pretty much all of you, are in a great place to finish strong. Okay, so what's on the final exam from weeks 10 to 16? The first week, I don't remember if I had these in order, probably I do. So there were permissions, so the things you might want to review before you fire up the final exam. Well, review lab 10, but the change mode command, and remember it has two ways of using it. It has using the letters and using the numbers. And then the long listings, ls-l, so that you can actually see permissions. And then also you might review the basic differences between what it means to be able to read, write, or execute on a file versus read, write, or execute on a directory. Okay, so also for the final exam we have the dot files. And remember, when we say a dot file, we're talking about a file that is named with the first letter of dot. And when you put dot as the first letter of a name on a file, of course, the ls command doesn't by default print those out anymore, so they're hidden. But the important ones for bash, there's .bash profile, .bash rc, and .bash logout. There's also some some systems will, older bashes used .bash login. But the biggies are .bash rc, .bash underscore profile, and .bash underscore logout. We also started talking a little bit about shell variables between weeks 10 and 16. This tilde here as a shell variable is a reference to your home directory. We also did a little bit of using viewing and using the command line history in bash. Then we got to my favorite part of working in Linux and in the utilities is regular expressions. So we did some basic regular expressions, and then we used grep, sed, and awk utilities in combination with regular expressions to perform different tasks. So those kind of all went together. And then we did a few weeks of bash shell scripting. So we talked about what is the shebang and where do you put it and what do you put with it. We talked about how do you make a script and then make it executable. We talked about creating shell script variables. We talked about doing inputs with the read command and outputs with the echo command. We talked about using the hash symbol to insert comments into a script. Then we did if and case statements so that we can make different things happen in a script at different times. That included, by the way, the file test operators. So you'll get, if you go back and review the labs, that's probably like week 14, I think, you'll find some examples of the file test operators. We looked at the difference between comparing strings and comparing numbers in a bash script. So that's just tricky, and make sure you review that so that you recognize it. Comparing strings uses what you're used to if you've taken a programming class, so double equals, greater than or equals symbol. So comparing strings in bash is using the symbols. Comparing numbers is actually using letters that represent the symbols. So greater than, for example, in bash script is dot or dash GT if you're comparing numbers. Anyway, just a heads up about those and a reminder that those are covered in those weeks. We talked about arguments to scripts. So we use the $hash symbol. That's the count of the total number of arguments, and we often use that in scripting to detect whether or not we have received arguments. And then we talked about what are called the positional arguments or positional parameters. The shell automatically numbers the arguments that are passed to a script. $1, $2, $3, up to as many as you get. Then we looked at loops and select. I think select is super cool. It's that super cool way of producing a menu. And then during the last week for scripting, we talked about bash shell functions, which are really just sort of miniature scripts that you can actually combine together into larger scripts. And then finally, we talked about dev null, the black hole, and how to use that. We used it in combination with find. Some examples of using find and then using dev null to redirect the error output. If you haven't watched the lectures from the last few weeks, I recommend that you go view those if you don't know or haven't seen dev null yet. And then the last utility we did was find. And I say that to the end in part because I like to write functions and aliases that sort of wrap my favorite find functions. And remember, find has a whole bunch of different uses. So you can find by the owner, you can find by when they were modified, you can find by the size, bigger than or less than size values that you give it. So it's a really, really cool utility for finding files and directories on a Linux system. And those are all. So it's weeks 10 to 16. So I just went and I read through the labs and the lab questions and put this little review sheet together. So no surprises, it's all the same questions that you've seen. And then Canvas will pull randomly from weeks 10 to 16 a certain number of questions for each week to create a final exam for you. Anyway, that's it for the content. So I'm going to switch and do bonus content. If anyone wants to stick around and watch or follow along with me, I'll try to pace it a little bit. But we're going to install a web server. That was the winning vote in the poll, was a web server. But I do want to talk a little bit about the generic issue here. So we're just going to look at the basics of how do you install and run a service on a Linux system. We're going to do a web server, and specifically we're going to use Nginx. If you work in a Unix environment, then no doubt you've heard of Apache. I have switched to using Nginx for my applications, and there's no super good reason to do that, but it is slightly more modern than Apache. Apache is still perfectly good for many, many things, but I'm trying to get myself familiar with Nginx ins and outs. Okay, so we're going to do Nginx, but if you are a sysadmin type, or even if you are a developer and you think you might want to set yourself up a Linux system, then there are some sort of general patterns you will see when you are installing a service. So generally you will locate and install the package that contains your service. That's pretty obvious, right? So if we were doing a database, we would choose a database system, let's say MySQL, and then we would locate and install the package on our system for MySQL. Some services, like databases, sometimes will come with an initialization script or some initialization steps when you first install them. So Nginx doesn't require this, but some services you may, after installing, find that you need to run some sort of initialization scripts or other initialization steps. Nginx won't require it, but anyways, this is sort of just a general pattern. Usually somewhere early on, certainly before you put something into actual production use. But when you're installing a new service, you locate and install the package. If it has some sort of setup script or steps to do, you might do that. Typically, you're going to locate the configuration file or files for a new service, so that you can configure them to your needs. Very often when you install a service, the default configuration will at least get you up and running, but there are times when you may need to make adjustments to either tighten or loosen security, things like that. So anyway, it's often sort of goes with the whole process of installing a service is that you find where are the configuration file or files, so that I can alter the configuration as needed. And then then you'll want to figure out how do you start the service, how do you make it start running, how do you do some basic tests on the service. We'll do this with the web server, and then finally you may choose to enable the service so that every time the system boots, the service starts up with it. So these are just sort of some general things to have your eye out for, and if you've done some sysadmin work, you know how this goes. So I will refer back to this as we do Nginx. I had to do a whole bunch of updates, so mine won't need to update. But anyway, that's the general pattern, and now let's see how that plays out for Nginx. We'll locate and install the package. We'll see if there are any setup steps to do. There aren't for Nginx. We will locate and at least view the configuration file. We'll start the web server as a service. We'll start it executing. We'll do a basic test on it, and then finally we'll look at enabling it to fire up at boot. Okay, so let me switch my view. So I have to fiddle with this as we go, but you want your, notice that my CentOS is powered off. Now this CentOS for me is the one that has my graphical environment on it. It has Xface on it. Your life will be easier if you run an install with Xface on it. So if you haven't done that step, if you go to the guides on my website, go to the guides on my website. Hopefully I added them, and if not, I will add them. Yeah, so I'll add the web server one as well, but there's how to install window managers. That's the system I'm using. There's also how to install display managers and desktop environments. So to do this web server one, you don't have to install a graphical environment, but it's more satisfying if you do. Okay, so the CentOS system that I am on, that I will be running, has Xface in it. So before you launch it, go to Settings, and then what we want to do here is go to the networks. Oh, you can't see it yet. Let me make it so that you can see it. Okay. Here's that settings screen that you get when you click on Settings. So you want to go to the network settings. And I've already done it for this machine. You should have a NAT adapter. You want to leave that alone. Just leave this adapter 1B. But what we're going to do is go to adapter 2. So you should find yours disabled. So enable it. Make sure that it is on host only adapter. There's a whole bunch of other choices in here. Make sure you select host only. Oh, that's interesting that you can't see the pop-up. If you click on that drop down, one of the choices is host only. You don't have to touch anything else, but you want to enable a host only adapter. This will allow us to actually view our web server from our host system outside of the virtual machine. And I'm just pacing myself. Hopefully that's all okay. So you want to enable adapter 2. Leave adapter 1 alone. Leave it enabled. You're going to have 2 adapters. You're going to have a NAT adapter, and then adapter 2 we're going to enable and make it a host only adapter. Then click OK. That's funny. And then we're going to boot up this CentOS. And remember again, so mine has Xface on it, so it has a graphical environment, and I can do a quick web server test from inside. So I'm going to boot that up, and while that's happening, I'm going to go show you on our website. Let's add it here, actually. That is a page. I'm just fixing this link so you guys can see it. Here it is. Okay, so I added a guide, what we're about to do, but it's also on this week's module. So if you go down to exam review, the bonus content, so this is that page. So this has a walkthrough of everything that we're about to do, not necessarily in precisely the same order, but it's everything that I'm about to do is in here. There's two links at the top. So one of them is how to install Nginx on CentOS 8. That's what we're using. So I sort of had a peek at that guide just to make sure I wasn't missing any major steps. And then for those of you who are interested in a full web development stack, what we call a stack, which is really just a combination of technologies. So Linux, Nginx, MySQL database, and PHP. There's a guide. We're not doing the stack guide, but I put the link there just in case you were interested. So I followed my own recommendation, which is I ran a virtual machine with a GUI. Now to save us time, I actually did this step at the bottom. So I was going to have us shut down our machine and relaunch it after changing the network settings, but I decided to go ahead and do that first. So if you're looking at this guide later, we did that step out of order. Okay. This will probably be where I go get a tea, because some of you are going to have giant sudo yum updates to do. I've already run it on my system, and it was a lot of stuff. So I might do like a few minutes of be right back and wait for you guys to get yours to finish. But just a heads up about the update. It may take a while. I'm going to skip that step. So probably need to make it so that you can see the virtual box. Okay. So hopefully that's okay for everybody. All right, so let me get logged in. So you may or may not have to do a yum update here, but we're going to install Nginx. Which for me is going to say it's already in there, I think. So mine's already installed, but I will hit pause here. And if in chat you look like you're going to be sitting there for a while, let me know, and I'll try to pace it so I don't go too fast that your time is wasted. But I also don't want to waste your time in the other extreme, which is I'm sitting here fiddling around while you're waiting on me. So you can let me know in chat. I skipped the update step because I discovered the other day that was quite a bit of updates, so hopefully you can just install Nginx without triggering major updates. I'm going to do a cheat here, so pretend like you didn't see this part. Or whatever. Oh, I can just remove that. I can type. Oh, it's not going to let me. Okay, I was just killing time. So if you have the guide open, you can see where we're at. So the last step we did was, that was cheating. So the last step we did was installing Nginx. So the next, there are no initialization scripts or steps for Nginx. You can just run it. Let's look at the configuration file real quick though, and be careful here because you don't want to write any data over this thing. But I think, let's see if we can open it. So I looked this up. The configuration file for Nginx is in etc nginx, nginx.conf. So I did this without sudo, which we'll see if I can open it to view it. And if I can, it probably won't let me write it, and that's kind of what I wanted. I want to view it, but I want to get in trouble if I... and I like Vim because it may highlight it for me and let me move around easier than other utilities would do. So with Nginx installed, this is the configuration file. I usually at least go look at it, and again, I'm being very careful to not edit it or overwrite it or do anything to it. I usually go look at it just to have a sense of what the defaults say and whatever notes in the configuration file say. So on CentOS 8, this is where the Nginx configuration file is /etc/nginx/nginx.conf. And I'm using Vim because it will give me syntax highlighting for the configuration file. Okay, so notice how it's all lit up. Now if I were to try to save this, I would get in trouble. The system won't let me, I'm sure, because I don't have permission, but I do have permission to read it. Okay, so you can learn a lot here about how Nginx is set up. So it's got some comments for more information. It's got some settings that it uses. So user, where its error log is, that could be handy to note. So var log Nginx, it seems to be where it sends error outputs and stuff. Dynamic modules. You don't have to memorize these things, but kind of knowing where the configuration file is, that often will lead you to a lot of other information. Got some kind of log formatting set up. Access log, which is also in that same var log Nginx folder. I'm just noting that. And then a bunch of settings. You don't have to know what they mean. You just sort of go down here. There's apparently the capability for more configuration files in the Nginx folder. So it's listening on port 80, which for web servers is the default, so that's useful because that's where web browsers are going to look without any help, at least one of the ports. And then the web server root, so this user share Nginx HTML, that's where the actual web pages for this server go. Now, you can add locations. So notice there's a location on line 47 here. I'm not going to change anything right now, but you would come in here if you wanted to do things like subdomains or redirections. There's a bunch of stuff you can do in here. But they're kind of beyond our scope other than just to give you a sense that you can do this and where to look. So here's a TLS enabled, which means it's using encryption. So it's all commented out, which means that at present it's only just doing standard unencrypted HTTP. It looks like on certain kinds of errors, it will default to certain pages on those errors, so that's kind of cool to know. Anyway, that's the configuration file. I'm not touching it. I just opened it in Vim so it would be all pretty and highlighted. But I'm going to quit. Just :Q. If I tried to write this file, I would get a permission denied error anyway because I opened it as my regular user. Alright, so that's the configuration file, which... so we located installed. There aren't any additional steps. We located the configuration file. There are more than one, but for our purposes, just knowing this sort of default one is good enough just to feel oriented a little bit. Now we're going to start the service. So on CentOS systems, they have a system control. So it's systemctl, sudo system control start nginx. Now mine's already running, I think, so it may just tell me it's already running. Okay, so now in theory the web server is running. And we're going to test it in two ways because we already did the network setting. So let's do it in the internal way first. So I'm going to go make sure that my xinitrc file starts xface. So this is my window manager machine, and I have xface in here. So that's my xinitrc file. So that when I type start x, it will execute the command in my xinitrc file, which should for me be xface. Now I have Firefox. So if you go down to browse the web and it doesn't start, you may need to fire up Firefox. Now I already have Firefox. If you don't have Firefox, why is that doing that? Oh, that's old. It's kind of misbehaving just a tiny bit. Why is it not showing the little thingy? Because it's not. Well, I'll just right click. So right click, open terminal here. So if you don't have Firefox, do a sudo yum install Firefox. I already have it, so it should just say already installed. So if you're installing Firefox, so what I'm going to go do is give you a bit of a breather. So I installed Nginx. I started the service. I started xface, made sure that Firefox is installed because I want to go test my web server. So once Firefox is installed, you can launch it from this icon down here. It may ask you to select your browser. Okay, so to test our local web server, we will just connect to localhost, and it should serve a page. So if the web server is running, it already has sort of a default home page in there running on this system. So it should serve me a page. Now, why is it getting that one? I thought I moved things around. Hold on, let me refresh. Okay, there it is. This is the page you should get. So that's the default Nginx page. So I'm inside of my host. If you haven't, you need Firefox installed so that you can see this page. So this is confirmation, a test that confirms that my web server is running. So I'm going to be right back and give everyone a minute or two. I'm going to go grab some water, but I'll give you a minute or two to let things play out if you need to catch up. And you can let me know in chat if I've just left you far behind, or if you're doing great, or you're indifferent and you might watch later. But especially in chat, if you need me to back up a step, or you need me to slow down, or hit pause and wait for something to go on your system, please let me know. But I'm going to be right back. And the next step is we're going to edit this page and see if it's served. And then we will go outside of our virtual machine and test the web server from my underlying Windows machine. Okay, so be right back. And that's really just to give everyone a chance to get caught up. Okay, so that's for anybody who's working live. If you were watching the video, then probably you just fast forwarded. Okay, so now I'm going to edit this page, and we'll have to sort of work around permissions to start. If you are actually setting up a web server, you're going to have to you're going to have to create some user groups on your Linux system and give the members of different groups access to certain parts of the web server's content, like the pages. We're not going to do that. We're just going to see if we can edit this page, but also I just wanted to point out to you something that I consider good practice. So don't need that. Okay, so back here. So if you have the Nginx default page, the next thing is to go edit this page to see what it looks like, and I just want to point out something when we do that. So the pages are in /user/share/nginx/html. So we're going to change directories into there just to make this so we don't have to keep typing this long path. I'm going to change directories into there. If we do a listing, so here's the stuff that was already there. A PNG file powered by Nginx. The index file, that's the one that we're seeing. So if we cat the index file, it's already got a whole bunch of data in it. So what we want to do is make a new index page. So this is just something that I've learned the hard way, and probably most of you already have good habits about this. But I generally am hesitant to delete things. So instead of overwriting index.html, I need to be root to do this, because these are, like everything in here is root owned. So we need to sudo, but we're going to sudo, and I'm going to copy the original index into a backup. This is how I normally do it, so that if I'm looking through my system and I see a dot or ridge, I'll recognize that as the one that originally came with the install, so the default. You could also say default if you wanted, but I use a ridge, meaning the original version of it. Now, and I need to be sudo again to edit these things. I can open this one up and I'm just going to blast it out and then try something else in it. So I'm going to open up that index, which is the home page, and I'm going to delete everything. So I'm just going to hold on D until there's nothing left to delete. Now remember, I already copied everything, so all these edits are happening. Now, if you know how to do this faster, it's fine, but it's not a very big file, so just holding D, and it'll go D, 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 D all the way down. So that's it. Save it as empty. Now I'm just going to insert hello. Now I wrote it, but I didn't quit. So I kept it open, but I did write what I just did. And then I can go back to the browser and refresh. And I recognize, okay, I'm actually editing my files on my web server. So there's that. Okay, last thing together is to see if we can actually connect to this browser. Connect our host system browser to the virtual machine web server. So I am going to write and quit this now. And we need to take some steps to make this work. So I'm going to alter the view real quick and show you where I'm going to get this from. So I'm going to go back to Firefox. So I'm just going to show you that down here, we're about to do this test. We already did one step. We're going to do the second step. So we've already, with the machine shut down, enabled adapter 2, and then started the VM. So now what we need to do is we actually need to go change so CentOS is running a default firewall, and by default it's not letting web traffic through. So we're actually going to go update and then reload the firewall on that system so that we can get to the web server from outside of the virtual machine. So these are the commands I'm about to apply. I'm going to do the add HTTP service, then I'm going to reload the firewall rules, and then I'm going to go grab an IP address. So that's what's happening next. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to stretch this out so that it all, same thing from the guide. So what we're doing is we're basically poking a hole in the firewall to allow regular port 80 web traffic back and forth to the virtual machine, to the running system. Permanent means this rule will stick when you reboot the system. That's a sticky rule. So mine says already enabled because I'd already done this, but yours will probably just say success if it's working for you. And again, I may have left some people far behind because of Yum updates, or left people because you're not interested, but hopefully my pacing is okay for everyone's, or at least most people's needs. Okay, so we got to poke a hole in the firewall, which we just did. Once we poked a hole in the firewall, we need to reload the firewall rules so that new definition, that hole for HTTP, is actually loaded into the firewall. Okay, so that's the first two steps. The last one is to run this utility, ifconfig. This has a whole bunch of uses, but without any arguments. It will dump to your screen all of your network interface settings. The one that we need is the one that starts with 192. So let me pipe that through less so you can see. So this 10.0 one, that's the NATed interface. And the 192 address is the host only adapter. That's the one that will allow us to actually connect to the web server from our host machine. So that's the address we need, which for me is 56.101. If you're a sysadmin, you've seen IP addresses like this before. So mine is 192.168.56.101. All right, let me fix the view so you can see what's going on. I'm going to squeeze that a little bit so it's kind of there. And then I'm going to show you Firefox again, but I'm going to squeeze it a little bit. Okay, so in Firefox, I'm going to go to 192.168.56.101. That's the address of the web server. And there's my hello page. If you want to, just for fun, you can go back into how can I show this? I'm trying to make this so you can kind of see all the stuff that's happening. I'll go edit the file one more time. So I'm still in the web folder, so now if I sudo vim HTML, we could do some actual HTML if we wanted. This is not proper HTML, by the way, but a little bit. Just made that up. The body. You don't have to do this part. I just am doing enough so that we can kind of see. Do a little bulleted list here. So we can see actual HTML. But the other thing I wanted to show you is that once you're sort of in development mode, don't quit here, just write. And then you can go back to your browser and just refresh. And you get the new data served up. So that's kind of cool. So now we have a little web server running. And of course we'd want to probably add a whole bunch of other stuff. But that's my show. On the guide, by the way. So if I blow this up. On the guide, I actually did a proper HTML page as an example. That's a proper validating, I think, HTML5 page. Anyway, that's the whole show. Again, this is an operator course, so installing services is a little bit beyond our scope, but I wanted to at least sort of give you the sense. Now if you're a sysadmin type, you probably just are all over this, but I wanted to give you the sense, especially if you're a developer, that you have the skills to go out there and take advantage of these sets of instructions and install, configure, and run services on your machine. So with the basic operator skills, you should be able to set up a Linux machine for yourself or virtual machine and actually run the things that you want to run on it. Installing programming languages is easy, by the way. It's typically just install the package that supports that programming language and off you go. Okay, that is my whole show for the semester. So I think a couple of people have done the final, but if you haven't done the final, good luck. If you encounter anything that you have a question about, please let me know in Canvas inbox. There's no lab this week, there's no discussion this week, it's just the final. So thank you a lot. Thank you a lot for those of you who could join me live and make it so that I'm not completely alone in real time while I do this. But thanks to all of you for the hard work that you did and sticking it out all the way to the end. I hope that you walk away with something of use for the experience. So, if you're having other classes, I hope those go well this week. Otherwise, hope things go well for you and hope you have a good week. Thank you. I appreciate it, Justin. Thank you, Linkridge. Appreciate it. So, everybody take care. Let me know if you have questions on Canvas Inbox. Otherwise, best of luck. I always like it. Like if everyone got perfect scores, that would be my dream. So, anyway, be good. Take care. I think that's it. Best of luck.